Greetings, metalheads. George here from No Nonsense Metal Reviews, back once again after quite a long time of doing one of these ones in particular, an underrated album review. Yes, an album that I personally feel doesn't get nearly as much love and attention as it deserves. Don't know why it's been so long since the last underrated album review, but nonetheless, I have an album here which I really do strongly feel is massively underrated for what it is. We're talking the sixth full-length album from the Bay Area thrash legends, the Mighty Testament, with their album Low. Now this one is an interesting album because until maybe 3-4 months ago, I hadn't actually revisited this album in a while. But upon revisiting it, I was really surprised at just how freaking good this album is. Released in 1994, it was the sixth full-length album from the band, and you don't have to be an expert in thrash metal to know that the Mighty Testament are an absolute thrash institution. They may have been slightly late to the party in terms of actually getting the albums out there. Of course, the main kind of thrash explosion, certainly in the States, was happening from 1983 through 84, 5, 86. So by the time The Legacy, the debut album from Testament, dropped in 1987, it was met with a lot of love, of course, and it is an absolute thrash metal essential. It's an absolute classic, but it was slightly late to the party. But after that, they released 4 more absolutely stellar, essential thrash metal albums. The Legacy is obviously an absolute masterpiece. Freaking love that album inside and out. The New Order, following on a year later, is just as good, if not better. This is an absolute world beater of an album. I freaking love that album to bits. One that's massively grown on me over the years. It's always been an album which I've considered to be something quite special, but really it's grown on me a lot with time, is the third album, Practice What You Preach. Of course, it has been given a lot of love from the band, a lot of stage time, shall we say, in recent years, where they've actually been playing, certainly included the bulk of the album in their set list. Then we have a slightly darker, certainly look at that cover, darker album, but still an absolute stellar album in Souls of Black. Really dig this one. Released in 1990, it's again, it's a bit of an underrated album. I feel that one is quite overlooked. And The Ritual from 1992, I must admit, I've actually overlooked this one quite a bit over the years. It's a really solid album, but you've got a run of 5 very good albums, very thrashing stuff. The very core of these albums is thrash. Even with The Ritual, where they start to kind of delve off almost in more heavy metal directions at times, a little bit kind of speed at times, it's still pretty thrashing. Then we get to this challenging album from 1994, Low. Album number 6. This is quite different. This is quite a considerably different album. But I think in order to really fully understand where Testament were coming from with Low, which is a quite considerably different beast altogether, it's very much more kind of, although it is a thrashing album and it's a very heavy album, it is quite groovy. It's a groove metal orientated album, but it still sounds very much like Testament. And obviously looking back through the ages of thrash and through the ages of metal, we know Testament then went on to become even heavier after this album, before disappearing, then reappearing as very much a thrash metal beast once again. That said, Testament at the time were exploring different things. They were trying different things out. You know, groove metal was really taking off. And actually just the whole metal world was a very interesting place in the 1990s. Certainly 1993 throughout the rest of the 90s, if I'm honest. And this is just of course, my humble opinion. And actually, I've changed my attitude towards the 90s a little bit. I kind of always considered them to be a pretty barren era in metal, certainly from 93 onwards. But actually, I don't think that's the case. I think they were just quite different years. Let's put this into context, right? So a year before Low was released, and this was not massively planned in advance. This didn't take hours of research. This was literally just prior to doing this review, me flicking through the shelves here, having a little look, and the results were interesting. But a year before, Anthrax decided to do something very different. With the first album with John Bush on vocals, Sounds of White Noise, this album is massively different. It's massively different from their previous full-length album, Persistence of Time, considerably less thrashy, quite groovy, quite grungy. Very different. So that's 1993. Also 1993, Sepultura release Chaos AD. Although still thrashing, just like with Low, it's still a different sound. They're kind of exploring, pushing the boundaries a little bit, getting influenced by the groove stuff. They're trying a few different flares and flavors. And for Sepultura, it also worked, in my opinion. 1994 then, another massively underrated beast of an album, which I freaking love. Heavy, but thrashing. I'm not going to say it's like Low at all, because Divine Intervention it's a nasty album. It's a very, very evil sounding album, but Slayer were trying different things. They were getting groovier and nastier. Also 1994, groove was getting big. Machine Head, their debut album, Burn My Eyes, massively influential, massively important album. Say what you like about Machine Head and the very new metal stuff they explored after this. This is seriously, seriously groovy stuff, and people were loving it. Even with the heavier bands, the death metal bands. 1994, Obituary release World Demise. This is a great album, but it's very groovy. This is a bouncy album, right? This is a bouncy one. It's still Obituary, it's still heavy, but I feel that's got a lot of bounce to it. So that's just to give some kind of context to what was happening in 1993 to 1994. Testament had also gone through quite a lot of lineup changes. Quite a few changes within quite a short period of time. We still had on Low the core duo of Chuck Billy on vocals, absolute legend, and Eric Peterson, absolute whiz. That guy is amazing. He's an amazingly talented guitarist and songwriter as well. Alex Skolnick was out of the band. We had James Murphy in on lead guitar, obviously formerly of Death and Obituary, and he'd been in various other bands as well. We had Greg Christian on bass now, and we had a drum change as well. We actually had John Tempesta come into the band, who had worked with numerous outfits, but had also worked with Exodus. So, another thrash institution there. So we'd had more lineup changes. Lineup changes are always going to bring differences in a band's sound and style, right? Different artists putting in their kind of different musical fingerprints, their different musical personalities. Regardless of what was happening within the world of music, within the world in general, or even within the lineup of Testament, I do honestly feel that Low is a really good album. It's a really solid album. I was genuinely really surprised seeing Testament for the first time live in October of 2025 at the Schlachthof venue in Wiesbaden, Germany, that they actually dug out 2 tracks from the album. They included the title track, the opening track, Low, and they also included the stunning and very emotive Trail of Tears as well, which I was genuinely not expecting, but genuinely really, really pleased about. I would say this album sounds very different to the previous albums, even the most recent album, which was The Ritual. It sounds a lot bigger, a lot heavier, a lot more kind of towering and in your face, actually. That could be courtesy of Michael, I'm not sure if it's Wagner, or Wegner, apologies, on the production or mix duties there, but also the album was produced by Testament and Gigi Garth. Not all that familiar with these names, but other than Testament, obviously. But I will say, what they've produced there is pretty big sounding album. It sounds very big. So the album actually kicks off, let's get into the nitty gritty then. The album kicks off with Low, which is thrashing, but it is also very crunchy. It's got a lot of crunch there, a lot of groove. It's more akin to what was happening with bands like Sepultura. I know I read a few comments when I was just doing a little bit of research into the year and what was happening lineup wise, and there were a few comments. Was this Testament trying to sound like Pantera, for example, or Machine Head? I don't personally get that impression, but I think there is a resemblance in the fact that you've got a big, crunchy, groovy sound, right? Low is very catchy, and it's a really good opening track, energetic. It's got a punch to it. I love that at this stage you can really hear, although Chuck was experimenting with kind of more death metal vocals earlier on than this, with Souls of Black, for example, certainly on that album, he's really trying it here, and it works. We then get Legions in Hiding, which is a monstrously heavy track. It's Testament really slamming their fist on the table and just headbanging, and it's just great. It's a real muscular sounding album. I love that one. It has some fantastically crunchy riffs on there. Hail Mary gets even more energetic, gets even groovier. You know, it's proper earworm stuff. You know, you can hum along to these groovy riffs if you want to, or you can just headbang like a loon. But that's a great opening run of 3 really energetic, thrashy at times, but definitely groovy, kind of crunchy tracks there. Then we get Trail of Tears, which is a really emotive piece, and Chuck does some absolutely beautiful vocal work there. Really, he's got a really good voice when he does his kind of clean singing. He's still got a little bit of a rasp there, as a bit of a gruffer vocal style, but he's got real power when he brings in the kind of, you know, the more higher notes there. It's really good stuff and beautiful instrumentals, absolutely stunning stuff, amazing guitar leads. You know, Eric and James are laying down some stunning stuff there. When the album, or the track I should say, kind of builds and gets heavier towards the end, it's amazing, absolutely brilliant. It's a real, you know, lump in your throat kind of track, actually. Shades of War, that has so much crunch, it should be labeled as a cereal. It's freaking excellent. I love that one. Shades of War has a real punch to it. The punchy, crunchy track. Great riffs. I do love the bold and rather loud drumming that we get here as well. It's certainly, if you love drums, then this is certainly a good one. We then get PC, which is an interesting one. Very groovy. It's got a bit of a punky vibe to it as well. Short and sweet, but it's energetic. And it's punchy and powerful. Dog-Faced Gods is heavy. That's almost where they're kind of teetering on the edge of what they were then going to really throw themselves headfirst into with Demonic, the follow-up album from however many years later, 3 or 4 years later, with kind of almost verging on death metal style. But it's a great one. A really strong track. I absolutely love it. All I Could Bleed is also a great one, quite thrashing, a little bit more of a old school kind of Testament sounding track, certainly at times. We then get an interesting kind of instrumental piece that really does remind me of what Sepultura were doing from Chaos AD and the following album. Needless to say what that is, of course, which is a good one. instrumental, just a bit different. We then get two more brilliant tracks, Chasing Fear and Ride. Chasing Fear is another really heavy number. Really heavy, actually. Got some great riffs on there. Absolutely incredible stuff. Some great vocals from Chuck. He does sound brilliant here throughout. And then we get Ride, which is a really, really good way to kind of round off the album. We do get an instrumental after that, but it's a really bold track. In your face, gritty, quite a nasty sounding track, but it's headbang stuff. You know, they could throw that into a live set now, and actually I think that would be met with a pretty energetic response. The last track I mentioned is the instrumental Last Call, which I can absolutely kind of do without that. That's not one that I come back to. Tend to reach that point and then shut off, because it almost sounds like it should have been a little kind of interlude piece on a Down album, maybe Bustle in Your Hedgerow or something. It doesn't quite have the Testament vibe there. It's good if you like kind of weird little noodly interludes, I suppose, but the rest of the album is solid. I will say, I think personally this is a really criminally underrated album because it's just not getting enough love and appreciation. You don't hear quite enough talk about Low. You do get a lot of talk, obviously, about certainly the first three Testament albums, which is very understandable because, let's face it, The Legacy, The New Order, and Practice What You Preach, that's primarily what people are talking about when they're talking about early Testament. Another couple of solid albums, though, in Souls of Black and The Ritual, but not hearing enough chatter about Low. I think it's a great album. Tracks to check out if you needed convincing, if maybe you'd not delved into this one, tracks you want to check out, the title track Low, I feel like that's a really good one. It's a perfect kind of example of where Testament are getting groovy, but they're still remaining thrashy. They're still metal. You know, they're not veering off into hard rock territories or just techno or bleep bloop industrial, whatever. They're still metal. It's still metal stuff. It's a great number. I think just for the sheer beauty of it, Trail of Tears is one that you've really got to check out because it's just a stunning track. It's just a brilliantly written one. I love it. And it's where it gets tough, but I'd say Dog-Faced Gods. I'd say that's a strong one. See the lineup there, which interestingly doesn't include John Tempesta on there, but I think he actually left the band pretty much on the tour of this album, or certainly very soon after, and was replaced by John, I'm not sure if it's DT, pronunciation there, but this lineup then featured on this live album, Live at the Fillmore. So, if you're a fan of your live albums, then Live at the Fillmore is actually a bit of a live killer. It was recorded on the tour of Low, and it does include a lot of tracks from this album brilliantly performed live, including the title track, that instrumental, which I can't pronounce, not even going to try, Hail Mary, Dog-Faced Gods, and Trail of Tears as well. But it's also just a freaking great live album. If you weren't all that familiar with Testament, this is a bit of a side note, if you weren't all that familiar with Testament and you're not all that bothered about a live album, you're happy to delve into a live album, then Live at the Fillmore is actually a really good introduction to the band because it includes the best from the first 6 albums, which are just cream of the crop albums. The latter albums, Testament, have been on fire. Of course, we had Parabellum in 2025. Before that, we had the brilliant Titans of Creation, Brotherhood of the Snake, Dark Roots of the Earth, Formation of Damnation. These are all absolutely top tier thrash metal albums. Absolutely brilliant stuff. But even in the dark 90s, Testament was still producing top end albums. This might not be as heavy as the excellent Demonic or The Gathering that followed it on. It certainly might be very different to the previous albums, but I freaking love it. I think it's a great album. Chuck Billy, that guy is such a great vocalist. He is one of the best thrash vocalists. Gotta be. Absolute talent. So, my friends, the rather underrated, in my opinion, Low, and it is entirely my opinion. You might think, that album sucks. Or you might think, that's not underrated. Not enough talk about it. That's the whole point. But what do you think about 1994, album number 6 from Testament, Low? What are your thoughts and opinions on this one? I'm not mad on the cover, but I do think it works. I think it looks 1994. You know, kind of reminds me, where it's like a bit of a interesting collage. Does also remind me, just thought, a little bit of that. That might be a coincidence. Does remind me a little bit of Burn My Eyes, but it reminds me of Napalm Death Diatribes. I think it's just the mismatch of different stuff that's going on there. Yeah, not mad on the cover, but the album I think is solid. What are your thoughts on this album? If you haven't heard it before, go and check it out. Let me know. Interested to hear thoughts and opinions of others as always. Hope you've enjoyed this humble rambling and review of Low. Please feel free to like, subscribe, share, comment. Support is greatly appreciated as always. Do check back soon for more reviews and recommendations of all the good heavy things. Until next time, take care of yourselves, my friends. Listen to Testament and stay freaking heavy.